Mac guys here on Birch 365. I see before me our buddy Les Bowen, who jumps in with us here for a May spot to talk about the Eagles. The biggest story last week, Les, was the schedule release, and we now know who, where, and when the Eagles will be playing. Any disrespect shown to the Eagles by the NFL in putting together their schedule in your estimation?
I don't really see that, Jody. I don't really. I'm not a guy who really pores over the schedule that assiduously. I wrote something last week on Facebook. I think you read it. You know, the schedule is the schedule. I mean, you're a good team. You probably had the most talented roster in the league last year. You probably should have won the Super Bowl. Of course, you're going to play good teams. You know, that's kind of how it works. I've never. In all the years I covered the Eagles, I never sat down at the end of the year and thought, you know, the schedule that was really the reason things didn't go well this year. You know, and my other point is people talk about strength of schedule and how the strength of schedule is so daunting. Well, the way they figure out strength of schedule, it's real scientific. They look at what teams did last year. And they say, okay, so this is the strength of schedule for this year. That's like me saying, you know, tomorrow's Tuesday, the whatever it is, 16th or whatever, 17th. Last year on that date, it rained. So therefore, I'm going to expect rain tomorrow. And it doesn't work like that. The strength of schedule will be very different in November and December than it is right now. We just don't know what's going to be different, but it always is. Things never happen the way they happened the year before. I just don't. The NFL has done a genius job of taking all these things in the offseason that 30 years ago used to be like, oh, well, you know, and making everything into, you know, now there's all these, the team.
Well, we frozen less. Is he frozen for you, Jody? Yeah.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, I agree with Les. I always go back to Peyton Manning because I always say, to me, he was the most consistent regular season quarterback of all time.
Yep.
And, you know, when he took off, it was kind of year two, and we'll try to get Les back up here. Yeah, Les, I was talking about the schedule, and I agree with you with that good team aspect. I always go back to Peyton Manning. I was telling Jody, I think, you know, he kind of took off in year two in Indianapolis, and I think it was like 12 consecutive years. They won 10 games, and like 10 or 11 of them, they won 12 games. Like, they're always playing a first-place schedule. They always won 12, 13, 14 games because they were a good team. And it kind of takes care of yourself if you're a good team. However, while I do say that, look, the Eagles don't have that consistency. They were tremendous last season. Now we get to see if they can develop that consistency of being a good team year in and year after year. But if you are a good team, yeah, the schedule, nobody's going to even, it's going to be a blip. You're going to win 13 games.
Well, I also think that maybe the schedule did them a disservice last year in that we all talked about Jonathan Gannon and the defense all season long, and people were dissatisfied, but there were these statistics. You know, they were first in this, they were first in that. They had 70 sacks. Oh, my goodness, you know. And there was this undercurrent of the few times that they played really good quarterbacks with lines that could protect, they really didn't.
We got less issues again. It's that Haddonfield Wi-Fi that we're having problems with.
Haddonfield, well, Haddon Township for last. Nick Sirianni, that's the really well-heeled people in Haddonfield.
Did you pay your cable bill this month, Mr. Bowen? Are they trying to tell you something by freezing up your video on us? Yeah, he's not hearing us, so we got connection issues with Les. But you were saying about Peyton Manning and how the schedule affected him. We don't know if he should.
Yeah, it didn't. Well, my point is, it didn't affect him that much. They were so consistent. I always joke that, you know, with those Peyton Colts teams, and really when he went to Denver, you'd start at 10 wins. That was sort of like the default. That was a bad season. And then they would go win 12. That was an average season. And if they got above 12, 13 or 14, that was a good season. And the consistency, and by the way, it's less and less is back. They had a first place schedule that whole time because they were winning division after division after division. If you're a good team, it takes care of itself. But Les was talking about the disservice of the schedule. They didn't beat anybody. How many times we hear that?
Yeah.
You just beat who's in front of you.
Right.
Good teams tend to do that.
I do think last year, if they'd have had some games that would have showed them the deficiencies that erupted in the Super Bowl a little more plainly, maybe they would have done something planning wise. Maybe they could have done something at the trade deadline if they needed to. I think even if you'd win 11 games this year instead of 13 or 14, maybe you'll find out more about yourself, if that makes any sense, playing better teams, and have a better sense of what you need to do in the playoffs. They kind of they did romp through the playoffs to get to the Super Bowl. And, I just think, it's not a huge point, but I just don't think it's a bad thing to play good teams. If you hit a streak of good teams at a point where you have key injuries, sure, that can torpedo your season. That can take you out of contention for the first round bye and all that stuff. But, until you get there, there's no sense in really worrying about that. And
you can't legislate injuries. I'm with you there.
Right.
I mean, yeah. Tell me who's healthy in week 13. I'll tell you who's going to win, basically.
Right. But if you're the Philadelphia Eagles, you can't use injuries and bad luck as an explanation because the Eagles don't ever cop to luck. When we give them credit for keeping their players healthy and having less injuries than everybody else, people say, well, you got a little lucky there. Well, there's no such thing as luck. So when you have a crop of injuries, you can't go, oh, we got bad luck. We just got killed by the injury bug. No. Either there's luck involved or there's not luck involved, one or the other. And the Eagles don't like to consider it lucky when they don't have injuries, so they can't lean on it if they do have injuries.
To be fair, and I'll throw this at last, I don't think they like that word. But Howie's acknowledged a couple of times, Les, that he knows there's probably going to be a regression to the mean when it comes to injuries. They were really healthy last year, and that's probably not going to happen again. But, yeah, they don't like that word, especially when you bring it up to the coaches. It's not luck.
What word would they use, do you believe, John, if they had a group of injuries, beta injuries, as Les just described, at a key juncture of the season?
Regression to the mean.
Okay. Yeah. The luck thing mainly came up.
Luck.
Jody, the luck thing mainly came up last year in terms of turnovers. And they were dead wrong about that. I mean, they were praising themselves for getting all these, having this incredible turnover margin. And that just isn't, and getting a lot of turnovers is not something that you see sustainable season after season with same teams getting a lot of turnovers. That isn't how it works. Some of it is luck. Some of those balls just bounced into Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's hands. It was like a 5-game streak where he got a whole bunch of turnovers. Well, that doesn't always happen. You can take the teams that take care of the ball, that can be consistent year after year after year. And then you figure if your defense gets some turnovers, you have a good setup there. But to say that you're so conscious of getting the ball out that you're going to have a lot of turnovers every year, that is not the way. Historically, that is not the case for anybody.
Well, it's funny. They've admitted, on certain days, like they'll admit, like Jonathan Gannon would say, sacks come in bunches, turnovers come in bunches. You can't really control it. And then you would have, you bring up the luck word. Then they go, whoa, we teach this. And they do teach it. But guess what? So does everybody else.
Right.
I mean, there is a bit of randomness to turnovers. And that's sort of the word they like when it comes to turnovers is randomness. And there is. I mean, they do come I can't explain it. I don't think anybody can explain it.
No.
I think it helps when you have a bunch of, and you brought up the quarterback situation a little bit less with good quarterbacks affecting this defense. In some ways, that's baked in, right? It's more difficult to play better quarterbacks than poor quarterbacks. But also, especially young quarterbacks, backup quarterbacks, bad quarterbacks, they tend to hold on to the football. And what does that do? All of a sudden, the sack numbers come up. And you get to a Tom Brady or you get to a Patrick Mahomes who knows how to play, and the football's coming out on time, and the sacks come down. That part of it I kind of think is self-explanatory. But getting back to the schedule, I want to bring up a point that I liked about it, Les, because I think there's going to be struggles. I think people are overlooking the move of coordinators and shifts. And by the way, I think both guys were really impressive. But there's always a little bit of growing pains. And on this schedule, Les, the front side looks pretty easy.
Yeah.
And the really murderer's row portion will be on the back end when they've sort of gotten those hiccups out of the way, or in theory. Do you like that part of it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's what you want. Like you said, they've got to work through some things. The defense is really where all the change is. There's not a whole lot of change on offense. I mean, DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny are really the only two
right guard
things in the offense that are going to be any different.
Yeah, right guard, no Isaac Seumalo, but it's much more. The changes are much more extensive on the defensive side. No question about that.
I actually like the way the schedule laid out. We said this here on Birds last week. If you knew we were going to play and you knew how good the players were going to be, the question is what order they were going to come in, who was going to be up against what other team. John, I specifically like starting easy. You knew there at some point in the schedule there was going to be a grouping, call it a gauntlet, call it whatever you want, of games that were going to be tough to get through. And then it backs off again at the end. Easy early, toughen up through the gauntlet, test yourself, prove yourself you are a Super Bowl contender again. And then when you need to add wins at the end of the season just to secure home field advantage, you got them against the Cardinals and the Giants, a team that you owned last year. I think the NFL did the Eagles a solid, not a disrespect or a disinterest. I think that they lined their schedule up as a 18-game journey and test. I think they put it together the best way possible for the Eagles. How about you, Les?
I heard most of that. I think you're right about the way the schedule is constructed. I think that Gauntlet's stretch is going to be really interesting, and they have some short weeks in there. It's going to be it'll be real interesting to see where they are when they get to that point in the season. I think they're going to be in real good shape going into it, and then we're going to, like you said, see. I think what I was trying to say a minute ago was the changes are on the defense, obviously, the personnel changes and the coordinator change. I mean, there's a coordinator change on offense, but we all think Nick kind of runs the offense anyway. And maybe that won't be, especially since the personnel isn't changing on the offense. I don't think the offense will have a terrible time adjusting. But defense, new coordinator, slightly different emphasis probably, and a bunch of different players. And that's going to be very interesting. And after the Super Bowl, I think most fans are receptive to the idea of different coordinators, certainly, and maybe some different players. And, it'll be interesting to see how they work all that out and what they look like on the field. After Sean Desai spoke to us for the first time last week and talked about the big thing I think everybody got was the wanting other teams to feel them, and that was an interesting emphasis from him. And he came back to it a couple times in his remarks.
Yeah. I think he was savvy, and I want to talk about Sean, but what you brought up about the offense, for the most part, I agree with Les. Obviously, only two significant, and I don't even think they're significant. Well, maybe Isaac. I think replacing Isaac Seumalo is going to be a bigger problem than people think. But I think they're going to be fine at running back. And I think Brian Johnson is a very good coach, and I think people saw him and he handled himself well. But I got to tell you, there was a pretty significant difference between Nick Sirianni and Shane Steichen when it came to play calling. I think there's a feel to it. And Brian, by the way, I asked him that question. He said, yeah, it's part science, part art, I think he called it. And I like those phrases. And I think Shane was really good at it.
Okay.
Really good at it. And I think the assignment, and that's why I bring up Nick. I think he's better at it than Nick, to be honest. It's Nick's offense, as you mentioned. But I think Shane's a better play caller. I think we've already seen that. So I ask you, Les Bowen, why is it the assumption that, the play calling is going to be just as good with Brian Johnson? I still need to see that.
Yeah, I guess I need to see it. I didn't feel that strongly as you did about it with Steichen, but yeah, you could. I'm sure you're probably right. I think Nick's had some time now. We saw Nick as a play caller when he was very new to head coaching and the job, and Steichen did it for the last year and a half. I would hope Nick seems like a pretty bright guy. I would hope maybe he got a better feel during that time for what they need to do and how they need to do it. And I just think, Jalen Hurts is so far advanced now mentally and emotionally as a quarterback. I think he can provide a lot of input there. I don't see that as a problem, but it could be. I mean, sure, it could be. And, we'll just have to see. That's a point that I hadn't really probably thought nearly enough about, but there is a lot of change. I mean, that's, and you want to see change when you end up runner up, you don't come back with the same hand for the next season. That doesn't ever work. And the whole runner-up thing, in fact, is very problematic, historically for teams going into the next year. It's tough. And that's something they're going to have to get around and, work through.
Les, John and I are both fans of CEO head coaches. John even more so than me. I would prefer to have a CEO head coach if I got a good coach and he wants to call plays, the offensive team. I'm not going to not hire him because he doesn't do it a CEO way, but I do generally agree with John and his philosophy. CEO coaches are in a better position to coach the entire team than a guy who's going to bother himself with calling plays. We know that Nick turned to that a quarter of the way through season number 1, and the success of the Eagles has only grown since. So he'll be a CEO coach again this year. The first 2 years, it was with Jonathan Gannon in the position on the defensive side of the ball. Mm-hmm. And it seemed to guys like John, yourself, who covered the team, and even us from afar, that he went pretty much hands off. That it was Gannon's defense. He let Gannon do whatever he wanted. He wasn't looking over the shoulder at Gannon and continually talking to him on game days while plays are being called. Do you think Sean Desai is treated the same way from day one? He's new. He was Nick's hire, and Nick spoke glowingly of him. But when they get there on the field for the first game of the regular season, do you think that Desai is given the same reign over his defense that Gannon did going out the door?
Well, I sure hope so, because Nick isn't a defensive guy. And I think that's one of his talents is knowing what he knows and knowing what he doesn't know, and not trying to do things that he's not good at. And, I kind of think it was that way from day one with Gannon, and Gannon didn't have any great background as a defensive coordinator, that he had never been a defensive coordinator, So I got to think that it will be that way from day one. I sure hope it is, because I don't think we want Nick, really inserting himself on that side of the ball too much, other than as an emotional leader, as the guy who presides over things. I don't think you want I don't much want to see Nick's defensive strategies, because I don't think he has them, And, I just hope he does leave Sean Desai alone. I don't see a lot of difference between his hire and Gannon's hire in terms of, Nick was involved. Nick signed off on it. I would imagine it'll be Desai pretty much, and the leaders, the veteran leaders of the defense who set the tone.
Now, the scheme is going to be a big thing defensively, as you know, Les. And in theory, I mean, they're not going to change the base philosophy. You mentioned Nick is not a defensive guy. I agree with you. He sort of understands that, but he has those broad rules, and it starts with what he calls the double positive. So he wants to win the explosive play battle, and he wants to win the turnover battle.
Yeah.
And the explosive play is, I think, the problematic part for Eagles fans because they like aggression. And then, we all know this. We've been around this team for a long time. They want blitzing and they want a certain, and that's where I think Sean Desai hit a home run using the terms like palpable and saying, we want you to feel this defense and talking about toughness and grittiness. I think he hit a home run. We lost less. Hopefully we get him back. So from your perspective, Jody, I think he hit a home run, but I don't think it's all that meaningful. If we're using the same philosophy and same scheme, he's going to have the same issues Jonathan Gannon has. Hopefully he's better situationally, at least in the fan base's mind. Or is it just as simple as paying the lip service and saying the right things? Because I think he was already good at saying the right things.
I cut out for a little bit of that. I think I got the gist of what you said, John. But I don't think there was that much wrong with Gannon's scheme. It just didn't adjust well. If something happened, as we saw in the Super Bowl, when the Chiefs scored touchdowns on the same play, run to the other side, there has to be somebody has to understand what's going on there and not let it happen another time. That was my problem with Gannon. I didn't think his scheme was flawed so much. The scheme is one, as you know, that a lot of people use now.
Yes.
And
I would argue too many.
Yeah.
As because then you have that tipping point, right? Les, we saw it with cover 2 and Tony Dungy. Yeah. We saw it with cover 3 and Pete Carroll. You always have this tipping point. Oh, Big's defense works. Let's copy that.
Yeah.
And then all the quarterbacks see it every week and they figure it out.
That's exactly right. If you see it all the time, it's a lot easier to play against than it is when it's brand new. But, I don't think there's any reason to think the scheme is going to be real bad. But I think I just want to see, and I think the fans want to see, the ability to adjust, the ability to look at something that didn't work and figure that out instead of just standing there watching it, again and again, watching Andy Dalton complete 14 passes in a row or something. That just doesn't have to happen, I don't think. And I think that's what I'm looking for from Sean Desai more than anything else, really.
All right, let me ask one more defensive question here. And this may be overly analytical, and I like analytics. I'm not a slave to analytics like some people are, but I don't dismiss them either. But the true analytics of last year, regular season, if you want to add in the players, we can, because we know what happened in the Super Bowl. The Eagles were the number one pass defense, if you're using the metric of yards allowed per game. They were the number one pass defense in the NFL. They were the 17th defense against the run. If I'm any Eagle opponent, the first thing I'm doing before the game starts is, we got to run the ball early because we can run the ball against the Eagles. Teams prove they could run the ball against the Eagles. If we're going to come in here and try and pass the ball against the Eagles, we're probably swimming upstream. Have the Eagles done enough this offseason to improve their defense against the run, in your estimation, Les?
Boy, that's a real good question. I'm not sure they have. They've done a few things. The linebacker position, which I think you guys were talking about when I came on the show, is kind of crucial to that. And I don't know what they're going to look like at linebacker right now. I think there might be a piece still. I don't know about Patrick Queen, but I think there might be a piece still missing there. to me,
Jacoby better be good. I'll say that. He better be what
yeah,
everybody thinks he is. Because if he's
that's
not,
a big, that's a
yeah,
big thing with me. There's all this assumption about
yeah,
these guys that didn't, and it's not their fault they didn't play a
no,
lot. They run a
no.
Super Bowl team, but they didn't play a lot. And you can't just say, "Oh, hey, he's great." That is going to be very interesting to see. I'm of two minds when it comes to defending the run. Point one is, if you have the best offense in the NFL, which they very might well have, then sure, run against them. You're not going to score points nearly as quickly as they will. So yeah, but the other point is, and I think we saw this some last year, if it's always 2nd and 3 or 3rd and 1, then you're not going to get a lot of stops. You're not going to get off the field very easy, and that's the downside of not being very good against the run. Is you set the offense of the opposing team up in manageable situations all the time. That's going to be a big question, is whether they've done enough to stop the run. And I don't have any idea at this point. I really don't.
Well, I'm going to ask you, last one from me, at Les Bowen on Twitter. Make sure you follow Les there. Still doing some things. Check out his schedule thoughts over at his Facebook page.
And also, I might have, look for an announcement. I might have a podcast with my name on it coming up.
Oh, very nice.
Nice. Probably not, Jody and I are probably not big enough names, but we'll gladly join if you need somebody less.
Yeah, you're.
Here's my question about the Eagles and what Jody brought up in the running game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think they want to stop the run. I mean, we talked about explosive plays, right? How do they stop explosive plays? They're always top 5 in stopping explosive plays. They put an extra body. They always had play with light boxes. It's basically, hey, Jordan Davis, go out and take up a bunch of blockers, and they don't really care about stopping the run. Is that just the modern NFL, or is it a blind spot?
It is the modern NFL, but I think in their situation, what I was alluding to before about if you're so bad at stopping the run that every first down run gets 6 or 7 yards, I don't think that's the modern NFL. I think you have to do something about that, because you can't get your high-powered offense on the field if the other team always has the ball. And I think they get into that sometimes, and they have that problem. And usually it resolves itself, but I would like to see them, become less of a real. The 7-yard runs aren't explosive plays, but you put enough of them together, and they're significant plays. And I would like to see them just a little bit better. I don't think they have to stone the run. I don't think they have to be first in the league against the run. But Jody mentioned 17th. I think like 12th would be a good place to do, or 10th, somewhere where you can, hang your hat on, again, being able to get off the field. We need to get off the field. And if you can't do that, I think you're in a little bit of trouble, even in the modern NFL.
And I might be comparing apples and oranges here, but I think we will see today or tomorrow, next 24, 48 hours, a massive reaction to the 76ers losing one game. Yeah. It was 3-3 going into game number 7. They lost that game. You watch what happens to this organization because they lost that game. We didn't get any of that with the Super Bowl. Isaiah Pacheco, a 7th-round draft pick, rushed for 5 yards, more than 5 yards per carry in the Super Bowl. And if you don't think he was a main contributor to the Eagles losing the Super Bowl, then you didn't pay good enough attention to that game. But it stopped the run. Who stops the run in the NFL anymore? Why do we worry about that? Linebacker.
Well, they certainly. Linebacker. I think everybody understood that they lost the game because they couldn't get off the field on that last drive. Whether you key it to stopping the run or stopping Patrick Mahomes, they had to do something to get some kind of a stop in the second half. Right. But yeah, the Sixers situation, very, very different. They lost game 6 and game 7, and they lost game 7 in a disgraceful manner. The Eagles didn't, the Eagles lost by 3 and couldn't get the ball back. That was a little different than what we saw yesterday.
Plus, the Sixers have been doing Groundhog Day. They lose the same way every year. They lose
in the same round.
Close games, same round. They lose to I brought it up with Jody. Kawhi Leonard, Trey Young, Jimmy Butler, Jason Tate. They lose to closers because they don't have a closer.
Because they don't have a closer. Yes, you're exactly right. They don't have the leadership. I mean, that's it in right down. I don't know if it's coaching, probably a little bit of coaching, but I think we saw with the Flyers and Tortorella that the coach can't really be the leader. You can bring the guy in that demands that, but unless you have it in the room, it's not manifested in the games, and they just don't have leadership.
Yeah, my point is on the Eagles in the Super Bowl. You're right. It's different because the Sixers have a history, and this was the first Eagle trip back to the Super Bowl in a couple of years. Last time they went, they won. If I had told you ahead of time they would hold Patrick Mahomes to under 190 yards passing in the Super Bowl, do you like
you would have taken that?
Do you like your chances?
Yeah.
I think 100 out of 100 Eagle fans would raise their hands and say, yes, I'll take that. Thank you very much. Well, guess what? He threw for under 190 yards and Eagles lost the game. And I'm telling you that was in large part, not only part, but large part to the fact that they couldn't stop Isaiah Pacheco. So if they want to sign on to it's the new NFL, who the hell, I think you phrased it, John. I don't think they care about stopping the run. I would raise my hand and go, I am sorry, I disagree with that. Stopping the run is something you need to do. Maybe not overburden yourself and have 6 linebackers on the field at once, but it's
there's a little hyperbole. There's a little hyperbole there. They don't want to be 32nd in the NFL giving up. There's a little bit of embellishment for effect, but I don't think it's one of their top levels of importance is how I would describe it.
Here's the way I would evaluate the Eagles at this stage. They haven't prioritized it enough. If you say it's not ever going to be a priority, numero uno, I'll buy that. But they have, for me, basically.
Well, I agree. Ball linebacker. I think they've taken it too far. I think they shouldn't value the position as a whole when compared to other positions. But I think they've taken it too far. I think they can, just throw whatever and be effective enough.
So Les Bowen, last question. Before they report for camp, let's use the opening day of camp demarcation. Will the Eagles upgrade the off-ball linebacker position?
It can happen in the spring. It can happen during camp. It can happen right before the season, as happened with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in the safety position last year. I don't want to pin it to before camp. I don't know that it'll happen before, but I think it will happen. I do think there'll be something else. There is another piece to be added there, and I don't know if it'll be, a piece that ends up making a huge difference or not. We all thought Kazir White was going to make a huge difference, and early in the season he did, and later in the season, it was kind of like, So there's another veteran to be added there. I think I won't be shocked, but I'll be surprised if that isn't the case.
Any hints on the new podcast, Les? Can you give us more coming?
I signed something, but it's a new thing. There's going to be different people doing podcasts for this group, and I'm going to be doing one of them. I think we're going to call it Bowen on the Birds.
Nice.
And it's going to be me talking pretty much right in the early going, but we'll see.
Nice. Bowen on the Birds. We've gotten plenty of Bowen on the Birds. We're always happy when Les can give us some time. And who knows? Maybe we'll be on Bowen on the Birds at one point, Jody.
I hope my internet works better for that.
You better get that cleared up. Les, great stuff. Always a pleasure, bud. Yes, and all you have to do is ask. John and I owe you. So if you need a little segment covered on Bowen on the Birds, McMullen and McDonald will be there for you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, guys. Good talking to you.
Thanks, Les. Appreciate it.
Bowen here with us on Birds 365, which, by the way, can we get Kaiser White back?
I know.
As different as his first half might have been to his second half, and I think there was a drop-off. I don't think it was as drastic as what Les just suggested, but I'd take Kaiser White back in a hurry here if they could get their hands back on him.
I mean, and that's the kind of player I'm talking about. I don't need agree. I mean, that's when I say I think the Eagles have taken it too far. I think, if you get me Kaiser White level of production, I can deal with it. But if you're starting to go to Nicholas Morrow level, I can't deal with it. So again, we were talking about demarcation lines. That's a demarcation line for me. Like, I can't line up with Nicholas Morrow as my weak side linebacker. I can line up with Kaiser White, not a great player, but I can do it. You'd like to have a star at every position, but that's not realistic. And I do think, look, I think it's more important to value other positions. I think the Eagles are right for the most part, but I think they've taken it too far at all-ball linebacker. Too far.
Still need to upgrade that position. We agree on that. All right, John McMullen Jody McDonald. We still got an hour to go here on Birds 365. Jeff Kerr, Mr. NFL from CBSSports.com, is going to join us in about 20 minutes. Stay with us.